Disgraced South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh is on trial right now for murdering his wife Maggie and his son Paul. And there's so much that led up to this trial, one of the biggest trials in South Carolina state history. The reason being, both Alex, his father, and his grandfather were prominent attorneys in South Carolina. Father and grandfather actually working in the prosecutor's office there. So this is not your ordinary criminal defendant. This is someone who's very sophisticated, and if he were to actually commit a murder as gruesome as killing his own family, he'd know the steps to take to avoid getting caught. It's a very circumstantial case. The prosecution doesn't have a whole lot of evidence, and their theory of the case is that Alex committed these murders within a span of minutes. So let's go through some of the evidence the state has and what they don't have. There are really three broad categories of evidence to try to convince the jurors to return a guilty verdict. The first is Alex Murdaugh's lies. He told friends and law enforcement that he was not present at the kennel of his home where his wife and son were killed. Now there's a Snapchat video that his son Paul sent his friends just minutes before he was murdered, and you can distinctly hear Alex's voice in the background. So if he did lie about where he was at the time of the murders, that's evidence of guilt. Alex, of course, told people that he was taking a nap when his family members were killed, or that he was at his mother's house. Now, the period of time he was at his mother's house was very important. That's his alibi. He told people that he was at his mom's house for anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes. But his mom's housekeeper took the stand and testified that he was only there for about 15 to 20 minutes. Why does the 10 to 20 minutes matter? Because there's such a small period of time where the murders happen. And they're very unique murders. You have two family members who were killed with two different murder weapons, a shotgun and a rifle. That's not something you typically see if you're dealing with one person killing two people. Now, of course, the state's arguing that the two weapons were a setup by Alex to try to plant the murder on two different people. Another challenge in the case is the lack of good cell phone evidence. The cell site evidence doesn't put Alex at the scene of the murders, and you have Maggie and Paul's phones, which basically locked and stopped receiving information or sending information shortly before they were killed, and Maggie's phone was tossed along the side of the road 800 feet away. The issue with the phone is when Maggie's phone was traveling, Alex's phone was not. So the defense is going to argue that that's evidence that Alex was not in possession of Maggie's phone. The state, of course, will argue that Alex was so sophisticated he knew not to move his phone during the time. Now, while Alex was traveling to his mom's house, he made a number of calls. Again, consistent with someone who's visiting his ailing mom. Of course, the state's going to argue that that was all just pretextual. It was a setup. It was a cover-up. So why does all this matter? There's not a lot of evidence implicating Alex at the scene of the murders. There's no blood evidence, and this is something that the defense has spent a lot of time talking about. Normally, if you kill someone within close range, you would expect to see blood on your clothes. We don't have any of that. Now, the state is arguing that Alex was smart. He changed his clothes. In fact, he was wearing a dry, clean shirt at the time of the arrest. But what the state does have is some gunpowder evidence. So this is a big key in the case. This is probably the second big category. We talked about Alex's lies. The second is the gunpowder. Now, there's a blue raincoat. The defense is calling it a tarp. That has gunpowder residue on it. And what the state is trying to get the jurors to believe is that Murdaugh was either wearing this raincoat when he shot and killed Maggie and Paul, or that he wrapped the weapons in this tarp when he committed the murders. Now, this is important because it's really the only forensic evidence tying Murdaugh to the murders. That's all they have. There's no DNA. There's no blood that we've talked about. So it's really this gunpowder evidence, and we know it's important evidence for the state because the defense desperately tried to keep it out right before jury selection. There was a hearing outside the presence of the jurors where they said that the expert wasn't qualified because the expert couldn't definitively say that it was a particular type of gunpowder related to one of the guns. And speaking of the guns, we have an issue in the case because the murder weapons have not been found. So kind of same problem with the Idaho murderers. If you're the prosecution, you want the murder weapon. And in this case, there's 2 murder weapons, and they don't have that to present it to the jurors. The third big key piece of evidence came out this week, and it's a broad category, and I'm going to basically describe it as the evidence of the financial crimes. This is something the judge in the case, Judge Newman, hadn't ruled on. But just this week, the judge said, because the defense argued that Alex had no motive to kill his wife and son, because they were the apple of his eye, the prosecution hadn't proved their case. Now, we all know that motive isn't an element of the crime, but jurors are going to want to know why someone would kill their own family. So what the state is arguing, it's a little bit of a stretch. It's a creative argument, but it was one that was necessary for them to get the evidence in. The state is arguing that Alex killed his family to cover up his financial crimes and to get sympathy. Now, without spending time going into all the financial impropriety by Murdaugh and his law firm, it's enough to know that he stole millions of dollars from his personal injury clients. I mean, this is something that is readily provable. He's no longer practicing. He's not a part of the law firm. And members of the law firm have testified that he basically stole money from injured clients, from family members of dead clients. So that evidence is strong. And the only reason that can come in is if the prosecution can show that it was motive for the crime. So that's what they're arguing. Now, again, a little bit of a logical leap. It's unclear if the jury is going to accept that argument, that you'd kill someone so close to just to try to cover up this crime, unrelated crimes. But, at a minimum, this evidence is going to help the state because the jurors are not going to like Alex Murdaugh, period. Because he stole from his clients. The other issue, though, is by bringing this prior bad acts evidence or mimic evidence, as we prosecutors call it, into the case, this creates an issue on appeal. Because it's so far removed from the murders, an appellate court in South Carolina might say, hey, judge, you shouldn't have brought this evidence in. It's too prejudicial. It's not related to the crimes and it's propensity evidence. So, as we're working our way through the prosecution's case, it's a very tough circumstantial case. Really, they're relying on 3 big categories of information: Alex Murdaugh's lies about where he was at the time of the murder, the gunpowder on that raincoat and tarp. Also, the gunpowder was also in his vehicle and on his seatbelt. And lastly, the financial crimes. The question is that enough evidence for jurors to return a guilty verdict? And a couple of sort of interesting tactical decisions by the state. First, they did not seek the death penalty, even though South Carolina's death penalty case. Second, they did not prosecute the financial crimes first. That's a much more readily provable case and would probably would have put Alex Murdaugh in prison for a long period of time. They chose to prosecute the harder case. Now, of course, I understand that you're talking about someone's life, in this case, a mother and a son, and that's the more serious crime, but it's also the most difficult crime. So it's going to be interesting to see what the jurors do with the evidence. And Alex Murdaugh has a very good defense team. Are they going to be able to convince these jurors to acquit or even hang? We're going to continue to follow this case and do commentary as the state completes its case in chief and the defense puts on their evidence. If you like what you heard, like, follow, and subscribe, and tap the bell for notifications. Thanks, everyone.